The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the AVPN January webinar on transforming low-cost private education in India through innovative solutions and policy reforms. My name is Ashima, and I'm the Membership Services Manager at the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network. AVPN is a unique funders network committed to building a high-impact philanthropy and social investment community across Asia. Currently, we have over 400 members across 29 countries, and today we are very pleased to have two of our members based in India speaking. Representing Center for Civil Society, we have Parth Shah, founder president. He will share with us how to build a dialogue on furthering the scope for integrating effective advocacy with innovations and interventions for improving learning outcomes in affordable private schools. Following that, we have Ashish Karamchandani, Managing Director at FSG Advisory. He will share about the program to improve private early education by FSG. He will also present insights from the Preschool Promise, a white paper that provides insights on how high-quality practices can be spread in the affordable private schools market. Before we proceed, a few housekeeping instructions. We will not take any questions during the presentation, but will open up the floor for question and answers afterwards. Please feel free to use the console to type in your questions during the webinar, and I will raise the questions to our speakers. If you have further questions that are not answered by the end of the webinar, you can email us at membership@avpn.asia. Without further ado, I will now hand over the presentation to Parth.
Thank you, Ashima, and AVPN for giving me this great opportunity to engage with this ecosystem. And welcome to all the attendees. I see there are almost 50 people who have joined us this afternoon. What I want to talk about is the rise of budget private schools or affordable private schools in India, and what can be done to improve the quality and the engagement with that particular sector. First fact we must realize is that India has the most privatized school education system in the world. More than 40% of the students across the country go to private schools. It's slightly lower in rural areas, much higher in urban areas. Out of those 40% students who go to private schools, quite a large number of them, and we don't have precise number, but I've estimated about 92 million students go to affordable private schools. Now, there is no one definition of affordable private school. People define them differently. Some have defined in terms of the wages required of a day that enables to pay the fees of a school. We normally define APS as the schools which spend less than what government spends in government schools. As you know, under Right to Education Act, government has to declare how much they spend per child in government schools. So that data is available from the government, and we look at that number, and the schools that spend less than that amount is what considered to be affordable private schools. What the schools do is that it provides access. It certainly is better in terms of learning outcomes, and it also gives a choice to parents. The choice was available to richer parents earlier. Now with the APS schools, it's also available to poor parents. The fees range anywhere between 50 rupees a month that I have seen in Bharatpur to about 600 to 700 rupees in the cities like Delhi and Bombay. I won't be able to go in much detail about the sector, but we have done a report on the budget private schools in India. It's available online. The report is actually 4 different segments. One is about the ecosystem. Second is the demand, what is causing the demand for the schools. Third is the supply side of the equation. And the fourth is a regulatory system that particularly applies to this segment of the schooling system. Now, APS has tremendous contribution to making access possible for poorer communities and giving them a choice. However, the sector faces a dual challenge, one which I call regulatory guillotine, the regulatory barriers that are created largely, particularly after the Right to Education Act that came into force. And the second is the mindset that these schools are not our schools, and therefore there's a lack of support to improve the quality of these schools. So unlike in government schools, a tremendous amount of resources which are being spent there for teacher training, for infrastructure, to improve the quality, those things are not available to the APS schools. Now, to address these two challenges, one contribution the CCS has made is to catalyze formation of a national National Independent Schools Alliance, which is private schools in various states of India. So it's a national federation of associations of low-fee private schools. And the alliance has three major objectives. One is to build a network among the schools with the service providers, investors, education, so that they're all able to join hands to think of provide better schools. Second, I think most important part of the alliance work is a regulatory tribunals, basically think about issues of improving quality or engaging better with the parents of the students you have in your school. So advocacy has been a key focus area for NISA. And the third is ways we can create school quality improvement. Right. So we've been trying several efforts. I'll talk about briefly a couple of in how NISA has been trying to improve school. Quickly, for overview of NISA, we have about 60,000 schools, about 20, there are 17 states, and we create states more than one, and as a few states are direct, and a couple of them have become of NISA. So first, in terms of the advocacy for policy reforms that NISA has undertaken, what I'm presenting to you is a charter of demands that NISA has, which has been presented to state government officers and ministers, as well as to central government ministers and officers. This is a general sense of what is required for this sector to do well. So first and foremost, academic and financial autonomy, ease of opening school. They also demand that the regulatory systems be focused not so much on inputs, which is currently the focus of the regulatory system. There is also
Hi everyone. So we have some technical difficulties because of which I think Parth has just dropped off the call. We'll continue with the webinar, and I'll invite Ashish from FSG to do his presentation, and then we can continue with Parth once he's online. So I'll just move to Ashish's presentation.
Hi, everybody. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you, and I would like this to be more of an engagement than a speech from my side, so I'm really looking forward to the Q&A session. Let me start with slide 18, which talks about the customer. Parth has been talking about the system, but who is this low-income customer sending their child to this affordable private school? It's basically the middle 70% of our population. It's people who are working as a maid in your house, working as a little taxi driver, may have a small corner push cart. And this actually makes up 70% of our urban population. What's interesting is, why are they sending their kids to these schools? So if you go to the next slide, slide 19, you'll see that based on our research with 4,400 parents in urban India,
because are unable.
Sorry, let me continue. I think poor Parth is trying to get back on. And if he does, I'll stop. But let me go on and say that 86% of parents are sending their children to private schools of this middle 70%. And the reason for that is very, very clear. They are desperate to get their child a good education that will give them the office job they have always dreamt about. And they feel that the private sector gives a much better quality education than the government. And unfortunately, they're not looking necessarily at hard data, although even if they were, they would come to the same conclusion. But it's their perception of the quality of private schools, the results they actually deliver, the way they are actually accountable to parents that make them choose these schools. And these parents are spending 6% of their monthly income on each child to give them a good education. Let me move to slide 20. Unfortunately, while the parents think they're getting a good education, when you actually look at the results, it's really tragic. 18% of children entering grade 1 have the basic skills and capabilities that a 5-year-old attending grade 1 is supposed to have. And on the language side, it's only 6% of children who have those skills. And that's basically the reason for FSG working in this area. We think every child has the right to a solid foundation and requires the opportunity to succeed in life. So what did we do about it? We first said, let's understand that parent. What is that parent thinking? Because if we understand their mindset, why are they making these choices? We can potentially influence what's going on in the field, why this quality is so poor. The next slide, 21, just talks about some customer research we did, which I alluded to, where we spoke to 4,400 parents across 8 cities, and the data is mind-blowing. If you go to slide 22, you'll see that if you just understand the context of how do they think about development and break this into 3 verticals: physical development, mental development, and socio-emotional. Physical, all they think about is height and weight. The fact that your child needs to be able to have strong finger muscles to hold a pencil to write is alien to them. So it's really interesting when you get down to things like hand and eye coordination, the ability to cope in a class with the physical tasks out of their realm. As far as mental is concerned, oh, that's all the school's function. They should do that. The fact that they need to speak to their kids, develop language, again, they're not aware of it. And lastly, but not the least, socio-emotional, which really helps you deal with day-to-day life. Parents are clueless. They think this means when a guest comes, my child should bring a glass of water for the guest. What's also interesting, I think those of us who are aware of child development know the importance of play. But as far as these parents are concerned, play is a waste of time. The only reason for playing is to give the child a chance to refresh themselves so they can study harder after the play. But that's the context, and it's important to understand this context before you start thinking about what can be done. So why are these parents sending their kids to preschools? And that's on the next slide, slide 23. First of all, 70%, and I'll show some of this data, are sending their kids to nursery. And the reason is very straightforward. They want their kids to do well in school. if I send my kid early, the whole idea is that they'll get a solid foundation. And this foundation is not just academics. They're very, very aware. Equally important are the quote unquote good habits of studying. The child should do their homework on their own. They should be able to take exams properly. So it's a combination of actual content and the skills and capabilities required to succeed in school that is the driver. Another driver is peer pressure. All my neighbors are sending their kids to a preschool. How can I not do the right thing by my kid? Moving on to slide 24, and I'm being a bit fast in the interest of time because I like Parth to be able to speak and also have some time for questions and answers. The way they choose a school for their kid to go to is 4 dimensions. Proximity. For a little 4-year-old, I want to be able to bring the kid back quickly if the kid is not well. Second, English language, absolutely non-negotiable. The only language of instruction they want is English. The third is attached, and the fourth is quality. And I'll come back to both of these in a minute. If I move on to the next slide, slide 25, I'll talk about the whole attached concept. Basically, this is a pretty competitive market. There are lots of affordable private schools. As Partha indicated, they're between 300,000 and 700,000. We're talking of literally an uncertainty of over 100%. But you can be rest assured there are too many. And these schools are competing with each other. And what they've realized is if I don't grab that kid at the age of 3, somebody else is going to grab the kid. So all these schools have gone down. Not only do they have a kindergarten, they have a lower kindergarten, and 70% of them have a nursery. 40% even have a playgroup. Now what they do is when the parent comes, because usually in every neighborhood there are a couple of good schools, the parent comes and asks the school, can I admit my kid? They say, well, you know, if you bring your kid in nursery, no problems, we'll take your kid in. If you bring him in first grade, we don't know if we'll have space. And also we'll test the kid to make sure they can actually succeed in first grade. The parent says, why should I take a risk? I'll just admit them in a nursery and I don't have to hassle about looking into whether they'll get in first grade. And that's why this whole criteria of an attached school, because I don't have to worry after that. The interesting thing is if you look at these 3 criteria, proximity, language, that is English, and attached, there are still a gazillion schools which meet those 3 criteria. So the most important criteria becomes the fourth, the one which is on slide 26, which is quality. And there it's interesting. It's very difficult to measure quality of school. So what do people do? They ask their neighbors, which is a good school in my neighborhood? They look at kids, which kid speaks English? Oh, that must be a good school where they're going to. And I'll come back to how they measure English. And of course, the results. Every school flaunts the fact that it has 99% SSC results. It's interesting, you count all those kids who top their SSC, and then you compare them the actual number of kids, and there's about an order of magnitude difference. But these guys are masters at marketing. The unfortunate part, and I'm going to move to slide 27, is that the parents are using the wrong markers to assess whether their kids are learning. And I'm just going to talk about the early years. How do you know your kid is really doing well? Your 5-year-old kid who's going into first grade? Standard answer. Oh, he can count up to 100. No, he can count up to 200. What's mind-blowing is if you give the same kid who can count up to 100 a bunch of rajma seeds and say, give me 12, 54% of them can't. If I show the kid 5 numbers and say, give me the greatest number, 80% can't. Similarly with language, every kid can read BAT, bat, CAT, cat, and spell SEVE and 7. But you show the kid SAT, SAT, they can't do it. They don't really know how to read, they've rote memorized. And that's the challenge. We are teaching rote memorization to our kids instead of activity-based methods that teach real conceptual learning. But at the same time, this is actually a huge potential, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the first thing I want to say is it's not that difficult to teach kids concepts. It's through a system called activity-based learning, and there are many, many providers that are doing that. So let me move on to slide 28. We have partnered with 7 such providers who are able to provide good quality basic education. They train the teachers in the schools, provide the material required, the textbooks, the workbooks, etc., all to be able to teach the kids activity-based methods and generate the true learning outcomes that are required. Now, what do we do with these companies? They're all good companies. They're already serving the middle of the market. We help them go down to the affordable private school market, which are three different things. First of all, the product. So it needs modification for this market, and we tell them what's going on in the market. We have education experts. They go out and try stuff. We give them feedback, and we help them improve their product. I shouldn't even say improve. That's not honest. Adapt their product for this market. Their products are perfect. The second thing is we actually do monitoring. We're out there testing the kids all the time, so we can really see the impact of what's going on. And the third thing, there are some very specific ways of engagement that will make this succeed. The owner of the school has to be engaged. So we actually do owner engagement modules. Similarly, the parents should know about these good markers. We've developed videos to be able to communicate to these parents. But the real power of what we're doing is on the next slide, slide 29, where we are basically leveraging the fact that we know how parents think. We know how owners of schools think. And we are working with these companies that are private sector companies. So our whole model starts at the left, the solution provider. We work with them to go into the school owner and explain to the school owner that he's teaching rote memorization, his kids are not learning. And if he teaches them real learning, the parents will value it. Immediately when the owner sees that, he gets it and he buys the product. He then goes and tells the parents, I'm doing conceptual learning, everybody else is doing rote. The parents are only too happy their kids are learning better. When they see that happening, they then go and make sure that they're actually doing better than their neighbor's kid. So they'll talk to their neighbor's kid. Very often the neighbor's kid is doing rote. So then they'll explain to their neighbor that you really need conceptual learning. And the neighbor does not want to get left behind. So they go into their school owner and say, what's going on? I also want my kid to have conceptual learning. The owner also doesn't want his school to be any worse than the neighboring school. So he goes and buys the product from the solution provider. So it's this virtuous cycle that we're building on. And the real key thing here is three things. First of all, we are leveraging people's motivations. The owner wants to do better than his neighboring school. So he's open to an intervention that will have a better outcome that the parents will recognize. Secondly, the parents want better learning. So anything that clicks with them as better learning, which these outcomes do, they're interested in. Thirdly, the provider, when they actually see sales happening, they're more than happy to do more sales. So we're building on the three motivations: the school, the parents who don't want to get left behind, the schools who don't want to get left behind, and the solution provider. But the real magic that is making all this work are these markers. Basically, every parent recognizes these markers. They talk about them to other parents, and the word of mouth spreads what is good learning. So tomorrow, even if a B grade provider comes in, it won't work unless they can generate. So we've empowered the parent to recognize good learning and actually make that choice. Just very quickly, where we are in the process. We're currently in our third year. That's on slide 30. We're working with 161 schools with 17,500 children. I won't go on about the parents and teachers. Next year, we will be with 46,000 children. And pretty soon, by 2021, we will be working with 250,000 children and seeing learning improvement by June of 2022. But more important than the numbers is the fact that this is a market where word of mouth spreads and providers are able to provide the solutions. So the market will be on its way to scale. Moving on to slide 31, we are co-funding, which we have until June of next year, and most probably till December of next year, is from the Child Investment Fund Foundation, UBS, Omidyar, Douglas Marshall, Central Square Foundation, Vitol, and the World Bank Group. And AVPN has recognized the potential of this intervention, and therefore they're putting together a collective of like-minded funders who want to come in as a group, both because, one, they'll get the CSR benefits through AVPN, but more importantly, as a group, they can learn from each other, they can spread the word, and we are thrilled because this collective power will really make our program go a lot more beyond just what we are doing. Part of the whole idea here is if we do this and parents talk, they will talk to all parents, including parents who are sending their kids to government schools. which will put pressure on government schools also to improve. So while our focus is the private sector, because that's what we understand and we can get scale, long term we expect this to go way beyond just the schools we are working with, and in fact, quite likely to spread to other countries. Last thing I want to talk about for a second is on slide 32, which is our research. We are fundamentally a non-profit and we want the world to improve. And therefore, all our work is in the public domain. As I mentioned, we did research with 4,400 parents on how they think, what are their beliefs, how do they actually make choices, and most importantly, how can we leverage that to change what they do and improve quality. That's in a report which is accessible from our website. The link is on this PDF, which you'll get. We also have a lot of research on how do actually you roll out good solutions, how do you engage with teachers. We have videos about how to engage well, how not to engage well. So there's a lot of learning that we have learned over the years. We are more than delighted to share it, and we are always learning more. So any ideas you have, please share with us. We have an assessment which you can use with a kid if you want to go out and check if your kid is learning. Please feel free to try it on your neighbor's kid or your kid, but be aware that the results may not be great because you're learning the wrong way. We need to get activity-based systems out. Anyway, I am going to stop. I've gone past my 15 minutes, and I'm hoping Parth can get back on and continue his session.
Thank you, Ashish. That was really useful. We have Parth back online, and I'm going to go back to his slides so that he can continue with his presentation. Parth, over to you.
Yes, thank you for getting me back. Sorry for the inconvenience. So I have a couple of more points to make before the end of the presentation. I want to pick up the point that Ashish made, that improving private schools would also mean that the competition would force government schools to improve. I think it's important to remember that we are not talking about government or private schools. We are talking about government and private schools. We want to work with both of them. Both of them are necessary. And we have to find ways in which both can compete on a fair footing and is able to deliver and are able to deliver better value to parents. So I briefly talked about the two key areas of the NISA, the alliance. One is advocacy and second is quality. The slide that you probably are seeing shows you some of the key policy wins that NISA has had. There are several of them, and as you can see, either through the courts or through the political system, NISA has been quite effective in addressing some of the challenges that the sector faces. Right. Let me just spend my last minute on the quality aspect of NISA's work. There are several initiatives NISA has taken. One is a partnership with Microsoft, the Microsoft Aspire programs, where we want to build 100 digital schools. There's a partnership with Grey Matters India for school assessment and access to service provision, some of which actually Ashish covered in his presentation also. There are several pilot programs in terms of blended learning through Zaya Learning Lab. There's a leadership training program through Chrysalis that is being implemented. Right. So there are several efforts of this kind which are ongoing through NISA. Now there's a 7-member committee which has been formed, that you see in the next slide, the quality committee of NISA, and their focus is primarily on engaging with service providers, engaging with investors to make sure that we find ways to improve quality of learning in the schools. The last slide is the overarching goal for NISA, and this is something required to build the whole ecosystem of affordable private schools, is for NISA to become a self-regulatory organization, to establish standards and make sure the members meet those standards which are being accepted by the NISA. There are several areas where they already have taken initiative in fee regulation, in child safety, the two of the issues which are currently on the top of the public agenda and debate. Right? Maybe in the Q&A session, I can expand a bit more on what is the role of SRO as is being seen by NISA in building the ecosystem of low-fee private schools.
Great. Thank you, Parth. We'll now move on to the questions. If any of you have questions, please feel free to use the console to type those questions and I can then direct them to the speakers. Ashish, the first question is for you, and this is from Ashti of the Global Schools Forum. Given the high demand for private schools and lack of quality supply, how is the APS owner incentivized to improve quality? Parents don't seem to want to switch their kids around, and as you said, that they're more or less happy with the quality. So, what is the incentive for the APS owner to improve quality?
At one level, there is no incentive. On the other hand, everything we've seen from the APS owner is that they are very, very answerable to the parents and want to keep the parents happy. Right now, status quo is the parents are happy. We've got actually satisfaction levels of over 95% on 6 dimensions. And that's why we need these markers. Unless the parents know something is wrong, they're not going to demand a change. The beauty of the markers we've developed is these are 13 simple markers that when a parent sees, instinctively they say, that's right, my child should know it. And therefore, we are actually changing demand because the parents now demand it and the schools respond to demand. So Ashti, we need to change the current equilibrium, and we're doing that by a simple set of 13 markers that help the parent recognize that their children are not learning.
Great. Thank you, Ashish. So the next question is for you, Parth. One of the attendees would like you to speak about some of the challenges, both internal and external, that an alliance like NISA faces.
It's a very good question. There are several challenges. As you know, NISA started in 2011, and we are still figuring out how to deal with some of those challenges. I think one probably important challenge is the fact the sector is very divided. And within the sector, there are different interest groups which play an important role. So bringing them together on a single platform has been a daunting challenge. Secondly, even those who come together on a platform, agreeing on a particular set of agenda, particularly in quality improvement part of the work, has been far more difficult because the perception of quality is different from different school owners. And finding a common ground has been a long process of discussion and negotiations. So I think those are internal challenges that we face. In terms of external challenges, I think one important challenge is that most people don't know about the existence of these schools. For most people, and particularly in the media and policy making community, for them, private schools are the ones which are high-fee private schools. So first, there is a lack of knowledge about the schools. Second, there's a lack of understanding about the schools as well as the people who go to the schools. So there are many sort of images which are being conjured up about fly-by-night operators, the parents who are being hoodwinked, who are gullible and sort of somehow being lured into coming to the schools and pay high fees as opposed to getting a free education in a government school. I think there is a sort of perception of the schools and the parents who go to the schools, which itself is a huge challenge in terms of the kind of work that we need to do through NISA.
Great. Thank you, Parth. The next question is from Parul Bajaj, and that's for you, Ashish. Parul would like to know that activity-based learning is typically known to have higher costs of material. Is that something that your work and your survey suggests too? Broadly, she wants to understand, does it cost more to do activity-based learning for an affordable private school?
The answer is yes, because you're using manipulatives. And most manipulatives, it's better if you just buy them standard than try to make everything from scratch. There's a whole group of people who believes, small is beautiful, Schumacher, etc. Do it yourself. Practically, it's much easier to buy these things. But when you look at an absolute sense, the cost is not that high. And given that these can be used over years, the incremental cost for a school is really not that much. And most schools that we worked with, as I mentioned, typically a person is paying 6% of their monthly income per child, works out about 1,000 rupees on average. In that kind of fee structure, you can actually afford to have these kinds of manipulatives. So from a very practical sense, that is not a constraint. Yes, theoretically, they are more expensive, but given everything that's being spent on these children, it is easily absorbable by the school. And in the long term, of course, it is the parent, but we do think it's absorbable.
Great, thanks, Ashish. So the next question is for both of you. So either of you can respond. This is from Shrutika, where she would like you to speak a little bit more about, how improving the quality of affordable private schools, in your opinion, is pushing government schools to be better. Because, government schools are typically poor students, and affordable private schools might not necessarily be that. So is any of this sort of rubbing off on government schools?
Maybe if I can take a shot at it, Ashish, and then maybe you can add a few more things from your experience. I think one reason why government schools are responding to this competition from private schools, particularly the affordable private schools, is the sheer fact the students' numbers are declining in government schools. So as for the DICE data, in the last 5 years, government have lost several lakhs students. And there are as many and more who have come to private schools. So there's a pressure on the government in terms of losing their own students to private schools, which has, as you can see in case of Delhi particularly and some of the cities, there's a lot more effort by government to engage with teachers, to engage with school principals, and to also engage with parents. Unfortunately, there has been very little engagement with parents whose children go to government schools, and so now their engagement has been increasing. So I think competition is certainly one key factor in playing in that improvement in government schools. Second, I think also understanding of ways in which it can be done. So as time goes by, as we understand from outside world, the ways in which we can help government schools to do better, some of those ideas are also percolating down the system, and many of them getting implemented. There are organizations and NGOs which are very actively engaged with government schools. So I think all of those efforts, not just, of course, from the competition, but also the internal drive and demand of the public is also making a difference in the quality of government schools.
So I think Parth has already answered all the questions. I'll only add one thing, which is in addition to the top-down, government is worried it's losing students, and B, there are a number of providers, foundations, non-profits wanting to help government schools. The third thing is actually parents demanding it. And that's where I think working with private schools, that knowledge about what are the good ways of measuring quality will spread to government schools. And therefore, there'll be a demand for quality education from the parents of kids going to government schools. And I'd say the only other interesting analogy is the US and charter schools. Charter schools are not solving the problem. Let's not kid ourselves. The numbers are small. But the charter schools have really pushed the government system to recognize that these kids can actually learn, and the system needs to change to enable getting these kids to learn. And I think it's doing that at some level.
Great. Thank you, Ashish. The next question is you, Parth. The question is that on creating the ecosystem to improve the quality of education, it's, finding a common ground amongst the many, stakeholders in education is very daunting. What kind of strategy have you undertaken to overcome this?
I think several things we have tried. One has been, I think, more fruitful in delivering a result is to focus on not large number of schools in the first go, but focus on smaller number of schools which have somewhat common understanding of the quality. So what we have done, for example, is offer some kind of student learning outcome assessment to schools. And the schools which have taken those assessments are the ones that we are now working more closely with in terms of figuring out what kind of interventions will help them improve their quality. Quite often, as you know, interventions don't really have to mean always spending more money. There are many times simple changes in the practices, processes, and the engagement could make a huge difference in terms of what happens in the classroom. So our sort of one effort has been, let's talk about learning outcomes, assess those learning outcomes for schools which are willing to be assessed, and then work with those schools in improving, helping them to improve quality. And as Ashish talked about, one good thing about the private sector is that there is a pressure to imitate good interventions. So if the schools see a neighboring school doing better, which means in terms of attracting more students or happier parents and students, then they have reason to find out what has changed in that school. And quite often they will copy some of those changes themselves. So the fact that the innovations and interventions can spread far more smoothly without much active intervention from the side of either NISA or any other entity is a great, I think, hope that few interventions that can show result would get copied across the system, even though initially they may not be willing to be part of it.
Great, thanks, Parth. So Ashish, I have two questions for you, and they both are around the same theme around teachers. So the first question is that it seems that an important part of the solution is to train teachers on these innovative activity-based solutions. Has that been a challenge for you? And what has been your approach? Are you doing any specific work around improving teacher quality in affordable private schools?
So the teacher is at the end of the day the person delivering the pedagogy to the child. So there's no question the teacher is the most important player here. Unfortunately, in the affordable private school market, the teachers are often not very well trained. They're good people, but they're not necessarily the most well trained, or even if they do have the training, they're not using it in the school because rote memorization is what everyone does. And we're not going to change that. Incidentally, I don't know what people here think, but the average teacher in a government school gets about between 15 and 25,000, depending which state they are in. The 10th standard teacher in an affordable private school gets about 15,000. The first grade teacher or the lower kindergarten teacher gets 4,000. So we're not talking of highly paid professionals. What's interesting is we have found that these teachers you can actually change the way they do things with the kids. And that's what we're aiming to do. We're not trying to make them super teachers. We're just changing the way they interact with the kids. So in activity-based methods, if you can get the teacher to do the right things with the kids learn on their own. And that's the power of activity-based methods. And most of our partners are doing that. Does it work immediately? No, but that's the journey we're on with them. How do you simplify your training to be able to get the way teachers interact with their child differently? And part of what we found is pedagogy doesn't work. It's practice-based. Demonstrate, go in, follow the teachers, see what they're doing, provide encouragement and changes during supervision, and an ongoing process. So it's hard, but it's not impossible. And it's very doable within the economics that our solution providers are currently working with.
Great, thanks, Ashish. So again, the next question is basically to both of you, so you can take turns and answer it. It starts with, given how fragmented the market is, both NISA and PIPE offer a tremendous opportunity to consolidate and therefore raise the quality of the affordable private school sector. Where do both of you see opportunities for external organizations to engage?
Ashish, you can go first this time.
Actually, I don't understand the question. When we say external organizations, whom are we thinking of?
So I think the question is more around what kind of partners are you open to having to kind of further the cause of the work that both of you are doing? What kind of external partners would PIPE and NISA be looking at, to engage so that collectively the quality of affordable private schools can improve?
From our side, there would be two kinds of partners we would love to have. First of all, we need funding. We're a non-profit fundamentally, and we need funding. So if there are foundations who actually believe in help children learn if they could move from only supporting government to actually looking at the private sector and funding players like us, that would be very, very useful. The second is, end of the day, we want the knowledge to get out to the market. What is good learning? If we can change the way parents actually look at learning for their kids, be it government schools, be it private schools, if we can change the demand side of the equation, that would be phenomenal. We'd love to work with partners on how to do that. I'm sure I can think of 10 other requests if you ask me, but those are the two which come to mind immediately.
I think very good, Assis. I will just add a couple of more types of partners. One obviously is service providers. So there are many service providers who have worked very figure out ways in which we can help improve learning in the classroom. Obviously, given the scale and cost involved in doing this, most of them are at a much higher price point than an affordable school would be able to afford. And so working with those service providers to bring them at a point where they have a much larger customer base, but at the same time slightly lower price, so that these schools can participate and benefit from their know-how, their technology, and their experience within the higher fee private schools. So I think one good group of people we need to work with is service providers. And the second, and I think this is important broadly from social point of view, is that government also needs to be a partner. I think government at the end of the day is responsible for all children in the country, not just for those who go to government schools. Right? I think we need to break that mindset and hold government to account for the performance of government schools for sure, but also for the quality which is delivered in private schools. At one level, government has a huge regulatory system in place to minutely manage what private schools must do. Right? At the same time, there is hardly any support given to these schools in terms of improving the quality or even meeting their norms that government imposes on them. A good example is our neighbor Pakistan. The Education Foundation, which is the province of Pakistan, has a great way to engage with low-fee private schools in the province, in which they provide, if you meet the learning outcome standards, they provide you infrastructure support, either as a grant or often as loans. So there are ways in which when government can help build the private ecosystem and make them more accountable, more transparent, and better performing. So I think we need to have government also as a partner in this whole process of improving affordable private schools.
Great. Thank you so much, Parth. We'll probably take one last question. So Parth, this would be more relevant for you. So how do you typically start the conversation and relationship with policymakers, and what have been some of your key challenges in getting them to just listen?
I think one
I think we've lost Parth, so I'll probably ask the question to Ashish. Ashish, there's another question around teacher salary.
thing that NISA has been able to do effectively because of Pardon? No, hello?
Yes, Parth, please continue.
Yeah, sorry. Somehow I thought my connection was off. So government is willing to listen to what the NISA has to say. The challenge, I think, has been for government to implement even the ideas the government does agree with. I don't want to name names, but quite a few state governments have agreed with the suggestions NISA has made, which I presented earlier on one of the slides, in terms of ease of opening schools, ease of running schools, how the processes can be changed so that there are more suitable to low-fee private schools. There's agreement on many of these issues from the government and policymakers, but there has been difficulty for them to move forward. And often, of course, they don't say it out loud, but there is an inherent fear within the system of teacher unions. So somehow there's a feeling in the government that anything they do to make it easier for private school to expand and operate would be seen negatively by public school teachers, and therefore there'll be backlash on them. And somehow they are not yet able to open the dialogue with teacher unions. And I see that as a critical step that we as private sector sort of engagement people, as well as government, would have to play to be able to make those changes happen on the ground, even though there's a consensus at the intellectual level on those changes. So I think opening a dialogue with teacher unions would be a very important step moving forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Parth. Thank you everyone for your participation in this interesting session. Thank you very much, Parth and Ashish. We will post the webinar recording on our website by next week. Please look out for it. Also, the 6th annual AVPN conference will be held from 4th to 7th of June in Singapore and will bring together a diverse group of funders and resource providers from around the globe to take part in the largest gathering of social investors in Asia. Early bird registrations for the conference are now open. Thank you and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.